This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1879, G.I. Joe 40th Anniversary Special.
Surrender to the new order of Cobra starting at noon tomorrow, or suffer my wrath. Devastation, ruin, chaos!
Egotistical peacock.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything that geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons, and everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists.
Cobra! La 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 la.
Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Shane Kelly.
I mean, Levinstein.
Matt.
Oh, and I'm Ian Levinstein. There we go.
I'm Chris Eberly.
Comic Geek Speak.
Now, back to G.I. Joe.
Great clips, honey. Great clips.
Thank you muchly. If only I had to pick over myself at some point there, but it's all gravy.
I love the Destro Cobra Commander frenemy relationship.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah. No, I've never heard that eloquent phrase spoken before until hearing this or watching this for the first time in many
First time. Oh, okay. Whew.
Yeah. No.
First time ever. Good heavens.
I watched it when I was a kid.
Okay.
So this has been the first time in many, many, many years that I've gone back to it because I have more of an association. I mean, we'll get into this when we get further into the episode. I have more of an association with Ninja Turtles than I do with G.I. Joe. But I still had G.I. Joes growing up, and they were still part of my my youth. Just way more TMNT and Ghostbusters than G.I. Joe in my neck of the woods.
Probably by the time you were getting into TMNT and Ghostbusters, the G.I. Joe line had reached that point of ridiculousness with their figures. Way, way over the top ridiculousness.
Oh, yeah.
But the line itself lasted a very long time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. As was the case with many different toys over the years. It's had that kind of run. But
in fact, Shane, I just saw I was in a Target last week in Pittsburgh. And I'm sure you know this. They've released now a line of figures based on the animated series.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Super 7 has them 3 3/4.
But they're not.
5 POAs.
They're not posable though.
No, they're 5 POAs, so they're like old Kenner Star Wars.
Yeah.
They look neat, and they go along with the Snake Eyes snow sled that you had gotten me.
Yep.
My only problem with that line, they look fantastic, and I'm tempted when I see them go on clearance.
They're very
but each
expensive.
figure is like $18, $19 a piece
expensive.
for just a little 3 3/4 figure.
Yep.
But their depth of characters they're going through is fantastic.
Yep.
It's amazing.
They know exactly who their crowd is. And
it's 50-year-old men like myself and Shane.
there was just an article. I think it was, gosh, I don't want to quote where it was from, but there was just an article that everyone is touching on in toy industry where adults in general make up 1/4 of the toy buying population right now and keep the longevity of toy industry going.
Oh yeah.
For what they're buying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, I don't think that's sustainable, but.
Well, I mean, I know. I mean, just from like going to like a Five Below and what have you, like you can get perfectly good toys from Five Below that I'm sure any kid would love.
Oh yeah,
because kids are kids; they don't care what it is as long as they're having fun playing with it.
Yeah,
it's the intricate, superposable stuff that the older crowd is looking for because we want to then like make our dioramas,
Yep. And there's a whole subset of stuff that Hasbro does specifically for the Five Belows, the dollar stores, the cheaper venues.
Yep.
Like you said, with toys that just are made to literally play with and bash around till they're destroyed or something.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, this is the 40th anniversary of G.I. Joe that we are celebrating here with this. And I'm also celebrating the fact that this is the end of the year here for Comic Geek Speak for the most part. We may very well squeak out one more episode before this year is through. But if we don't, either way, Merry Christmas to those who are celebrating. Happy Hanukkah for those who are celebrating. I got the date horribly wrong for Hanukkah. On last episode, and somehow said that it was starting on the 21st. That is very much not true. It's already day 3. But either way,
wow!
Happy holidays to everybody, and whatever you happen to celebrate, have a healthy and a hearty one. And here to that.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. And of course, patreon.com/Comic Geek Speak. For those of you who are donating to the show in any way, shape, or form, we thank you so much for that. And if not, and you just want to support us, especially during the holiday season here, just shoot us an iTunes review, or let a friend know about us, and that's just as good as anything else. So we thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Support.
Thank you.
Let's welcome Matt. So glad Matt is joining us, a stalwart G.I. Joe fan.
Indeed.
Well, it's amazing. I remember in the 80s, my cousin, who was a few years older than I am, going over to his house. And he had, some of the toys. And I remember just looking at him peripherally and him saying, I can guarantee you're going to be interested in G.I. Joe at some point. And I thought, nah, I won't be. And I enjoyed watching the cartoon, but I really didn't I wouldn't say into G.I. Joe until probably within the last 10 years when I started getting the when I started getting the comics. I mean, the only action figure I ever had was the anniversary Snake Eyes. But it was only, I just had that desire because I was wrapping up reading the Transformers that Marvel put out.
Yep.
And I was like, let me dive into the G.I. Joe stuff. And then I would say that's probably when I really got into it.
Wow.
Into the mythos. And then I kind of went back and rewatched the cartoons to kind of compare versus what I remember and what was in the books themselves. Although I will have to say the G.I. Joe movie, I remember the animated movie from 87, I believe, was that's one of the movies that I think about fairly regularly, I'd say. Or more so, it has one of my favorite lines that I think about a lot. It's the I'm not sure how far down the rabbit hole we're going in this episode today, but if you guys remember, Falcon is blowing up the
BET.
And he's overloading it. It's going to blow up. Sergeant Slaughter and Jinx is on the other side of a ravine, and he says, "Just get out of here. Forget about me." And Sergeant Slaughter says, and this is the line that I think about all the time: "Falcon, we all go home, or nobody goes home."
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that I think about is when I'm doing stuff, if someone's having some issues, I like to remind, I'll drag you over the finish line because we all go home or nobody goes home.
Yeah. Then he rips his belt out. Jinx grabs it, swings around, and catches Falcon by the ankles.
And then you hear, "Falcon, grab my feet."
Well, we're going to be, just so the listeners know, what we're going to be focusing on today. I mean, I'm sure we'll go down rabbit holes, as Matt mentioned, but we're going to talk about and sort of compare and contrast the two major sort of launchings of G.I. Joe 1982. So the M.A.S.S device Ian has on the screen, which is the first animated miniseries.
Yep.
And the classic issue #1 by Larry Hama, Herb Trimpe, and Bob McLeod, the comic book, which also came out in 1982, which featured, of course, the first animated commercials for a comic book ever produced on television. So I'm really looking forward to all of us because we're all coming at this from a little bit different perspectives. Ian's a little bit younger, but he has his own sort of experiences with G.I. Joe. Yeah. But this is going to be fun. Ian, why don't you tell listeners, because we've done other episodes on G.I. Joe as well, they want to check out too.
Yeah, sure. So there's 3 of note. The oldest one goes all the way back to episode 312 of the show. So that's way back on October 23rd, 2007. There was a spotlight on G.I. Joe. But this spotlighted everything from the 12-inch figures to the comic book and the birth of the 3 3/4 inch figures. So definitely Jamie was involved because we know he loved those 12-inch figures.
He was on the 12-inch side.
Yep.
Very much so. And that was the first time it came up on the show. From there was a later spotlight on G.I. Joe and comics in particular that was shoehorned back on June 21st, 2012, episode 1241 of the show. And then there was a review of the reboot of G.I. Joe under IDW, an Off the Racks episode that aired on March 6, 2013, episode 1343. So that's 3 episodes you can reference with a whole bunch of G.I. Joe content.
Yeah, and then the second spotlight was myself, Matt, and Shane. We dug deep into the whole Marvel run, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So if people are interested in that, there's more information there.
Yeah. I'll start. I mean, as I've kind of already said, like I have the least, history with G.I. Joe out of everybody on the call here. I did have tons of the rubber band figures, growing up. I remember I had so much fun just twisting their torsos back and forth. Like when I was young enough, where like that was like the one thing that eventually they would snap, and then I'd go buy a new one, and then that was the way that would work. I didn't even care which ones they were, as long as I was able to just do the back forth, back forth, back forth.
That's how Ted Bundy got started.
Yeah, no.
Oh.
I wasn't feeding them that anybody, so it's fine. But I remember watching the animated series tons of times as well. At that point, it was mostly in reruns when I was watching it. Because what was the original run for the series, Shane? Do you happen?
Well, there was a miniseries.
There was miniseries. Then a year or so went by. Then a second miniseries. Then another year or so. Then the Pyramid of Darkness.
And then the series.
And then right after that, the series started.
So I want to say 84 for the full series.
Yeah,
maybe?
84, 85. And then it lasted like, I don't know, 80 episodes or so, and changed hands to a different company and then continued on from there.
There were technically 95 episodes altogether. The funniest part is that when you look at it, because of the miniseries, it lists it as 2 seasons for 95 episodes, which is ridiculous when you think about it.
What opening do you guys think of when you think of the animated series?
My favorite is the second one for the Revenge of Cobra.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of the M.A.S.S device opening.
I think of the movie more than anything else. Not only is it the most beautifully done animation out of everything, because it's light years better than any of the other animation, but it's epic. You know, it has it's almost a story or a mini episode happening as an intro, and I always found that super cool.
Yeah.
The only problem with that intro, and I don't know why it is like this, and I thought at the time it was my TVs. It's dark. It's a dark shaded animation that they used versus the lighter colors of the regular animated series.
Yeah. Yep. Geek took over the animation in 1989, and then it ran until 92. That's probably the one that I knew the most, now that I think about it, because like age-wise, I was around 5 when it started in 89, and then ran until 92. So that's like right before stuff like X-Men the Animated Series and Batman the Animated Series were coming out. So my formative years.
And
is that right around the time that Storm Shadow jumped to the Joes?
Yeah,
they were working missions.
And Cobra Commander was in a mech suit, and Serpentor was a little bit different than what he is in the first iteration. I also think that they changed the opening song to be more international, not American Hero. I can't quite remember when that happened, but there is a different song lyrical status that goes with that.
There's a collection of all of the openings on YouTube that I might link to in the show notes, but either way, it's easy enough. Just find intros G.I. Joe, search for them on YouTube, and you'll find all of them, including the movie, including all the miniseries, and all the changes that happened over the years, if you want to sort of piece it together. When did Cobra Commander's mask change?
Well, it was issue 55 in the comic book, in the Marvel comic book. There was a cover unmasked, and it was Destro, Snake Eyes, and Cobra Commander on the cover.
Okay.
But that's probably
the bandana look was a bit jarring for me even as a kid, and like now looking at it, like it's funny how like I look for screenshots and like some of them have the mask, like the full iron mask, and then others just have the overhead bandana essentially as a very, very different look for Cobra Commander.
Shane, I want to call back to when you mentioned that they might have become more international. It's funny. Getting ready for this episode, I did watch on YouTube all the intros, getting ready for that. And as I'm watching it, I was thinking of a couple things. Initially, was a conversation I had with a buddy of mine a couple of years ago about Paw Patrol. Like, where do they find the funding for this? I mean, I know how Cobra gets its funding because it's a terrorist organization, but I was like, from that side of it, then I'm thinking, as a libertarian, I like the idea of fighting for freedom and liberty, but then also as libertarian, I don't necessarily like the idea of my tax dollars going to this team to almost fight away from the continental or from the United States and the territories to fight for liberty and freedom. Yeah. It's like, so I've kind of gotten to that point where I like the idea, but then I'm also thinking of the cost. And
well, I think to kind of piggyback on Matt's sentiment, I think one of the things we should emphasize in our discussion is, and it's part of the fun, is how dramatically different Larry Hama interprets G.I. Joe in the comic.
Oh my God, yeah.
Versus how it's interpreted in the animated series. And I mean, obviously the source material is the same because Larry Hama basically created G.I. Joe, Real American Hero.
Yep.
He wrote all the dossier cards.
For
like
the toys,
they sent him sketches of characters, and then he created all their personalities. This is all Larry Hama. Like everything we're going to talk about, he's like the progenitor of all of this, and that should be noted over and over and over again because.
Well, if you think about those cards that he made, that became part of what they used for the toy line.
Sure.
And I remember collecting other I remember Ninja Turtles. They had the same thing. So that really established action figures having that little dossier when you get the figure for a lot of the lines.
And then Marvel also used that for like the 90s line of like action figures that came out for like say like the X-Men, Spider-Man and stuff like that. There was always
Kenner used it for the back of the superpowers a little bit.
Yep. And I mean we'll get into it, but I'll say that watching Mass Device, I was actually surprised at how mature it was.
Oh yeah.
I was expecting, and it might be because I associate more with maybe later on in the animated series when Deke took it over from Sunbow and it was a very different show, is that I was expecting something more kiddie and watered down and not necessarily what you get out of that.
And I think, Ian, what's interesting about the cartoon, I mean, I've seen them all so many times and just watched the Mass Device. I watched it just 2 days ago. You can see they're trying to kind of walk a line between, we want this to be kind of sophisticated in some ways. We still have to sell toys. So, we're going to make sure every item gets in the show so we can feature everything. But we're also going to try to do some things that are kind of sophisticated. Like I learned a lot of good vocabulary from the G.I. Joe cartoon. Like when Destro calls Cobra Commander reptilian popinjay, great insults, but I didn't know what a popinjay was. It's a great word to learn. Right. And as you go further into the series, when they start the regular series, I remember there's one episode where like Cobra Commander is quoting Stalin, like it's interesting because it's obviously designed for kids to sell toys, but at the same time they are doing some things that are a little more involved. And then Hama just goes, the G.I. Joe comic is adult.
Oh yeah,
it is a totally adult comic, and as I'm sure we'll get into, I think it's one of the best comics of the 1980s period. And it's go ahead, Matt.
I was gonna say because I was watching it today, the Mass Device, and I had forgotten that even though they're shooting laser beams, they're actually round. They sound like
rounds of bullets.
Firearms that they're firing off.
That's the only. I think Shane will concur. That's the only series in the whole overall show where they actually make bullet sound effects.
Yeah. After that, it was
then they just they're just I think they're stealing from Battlestar Galactica. Actually, that's what it sounds like.
Laser beams.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking of standards and practices, I mean, you go further to the stuff that Batman the Animated Series had to deal with.
Yeah.
The progenitor was definitely G.I. Joe, and like, oh yeah, no, they all have to have parachutes when they're going out of the sky.
That was a huge stipulation: is everybody on the cartoon has to survive.
Yet, what's interesting What I'd almost forgotten, because you're right about that, of course, in the M.A.S.S device, there's a couple scenes where Cobra troopers have clearly died. When Duke escapes the Cobra Fortress in the hang glider, and the one trooper runs in the rock and he just falls off the rock, like that guy's dead. Or when
there's no parachute and he's in a canyon, he's above a canyon. There's no surviving.
Or when they're storming the Cobra Fortress at the end, and there's some Cobra troopers on like that really cool hover vehicle, and it slides down the cliff. Those guys are dead.
There's no foam cushion at the bottom catching them.
Not to mention
the underwater.
A lot more references to slavery than I was expecting.
Oh yes, Ian, I'm fascinated. Now, I know this isn't the first time you've seen this, but I'm sure you haven't seen it in many years, correct?
Yeah. No, I definitely watched this when I was younger, but it has been quite some time, and I didn't absorb it then. Like I certainly absorbed it now.
So as a seasoned veteran appreciator of animation, like what's your takeaway now as an adult when you watch this?
I mean this sincerely from the bottom of my heart. 80s animation overall, I'm talking the animation, I'm not talking story.
Yeah.
Animation is terrible.
Get the F off of here. Get the F off.
And I'm a Turtles guy, and even I know the Turtles was
and you know what? I agree with you, but what's interesting is, and I'm sure Shannon remember this, and Matt probably too, when they did the comic, the commercial for the Marvel comic, because it was quick, the animation that is awesome. Really high level. And then when you watch the show, it's such a stark contrast between that commercial and the show.
And the only thing I'll say about the difference there is the M.A.S.S device and the Revenge of Cobra are better than the Pyramid of Darkness and everything that follows.
Definitely.
So they definitely put some effort into those first two miniseries.
The same with the first season of Turtles. The first season of Turtles is a miniseries, so you could tell that the animation budget was higher because they had fewer episodes to produce.
Yeah,
and it's not even necessarily that it's bad. It's just you could tell that they're only using keyframes a lot of the times. Like it's not quite 1960s, barely moving Marvel cartoons.
Yeah,
but it's. There's definitely corners cut. Yeah.
Ian, I don't think you appreciate what type of effort goes in to make Sergeant Slaughter look like The Rock back in the 80s with that cartoon. Animation.
I appreciate it, man. Trust me. Like I love every single minute of it. Don't get me wrong. It's just I come with a critical eye. And,
That's right.
Yes. In fact, you know what? Screw it. Hold on. Let me share this now. Shane sent me this picture.
So that's for those that can see it, that's my current G.I. Joe classified collection that's on my desk right to my right. So where there's that
the Muppets
gap
made the list.
Down the Muppet. Well, see, I trimmed it down just to show as many Joes, but right behind them on the shelves under LED lights are the Muppets.
I didn't realize they've released this many characters.
Shane. Yeah, they're up into like the 50s range of characters.
Chris, you're falling behind.
Wow.
The most recent ones are Zorana on the left, Crimson Guard in the middle between Tomax and Zaymot, Dusty on the right behind Tiger Force Outback, and to the left I skipped over the Python Patrol Bat. They're the most recent ones.
Very cool.
Wow.
And
we'll call him Timber.
And Dr. Mindbender. You can see weird
Dr. Mindbender in his S&M outfit.
Yep. Yeah, and then Serpentor. This is where this guy on the air chariot just doesn't fit on the desk anywhere. There's just no way.
Oh my God.
And coming this year sometime, they're going to produce a 6-inch scale Cobra Flight Pod. I can't imagine how big.
You mean the Trouble Bubble?
Yeah. I can't imagine how big that's going to be.
How many of these were exclusive, Shane, by the way?
Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I would say.
Which ones aren't?
Probably almost half of them.
Okay.
Which that's the frustrating part.
Yeah.
And most of them are Target exclusives, which are extremely frustrating. But yeah, it's a lot. Now, part of me thinks that was just the first 2 years, because we're just over 2 years into this. That's really just to get the line some legs. now that they've done well over the last 2 years, and especially after the His Tank Has Lab, which was funded in record time, now I think there's an increase to the waves, like from 4 figures to 5 figures per wave, and because the supply chains have loosened up a little bit, they'll be more regularly set out. So you might see 20 to 30 figures a year, more on the regular release side, less on the exclusives. They're still there, but I think you'll see a little bit more regular releases.
And like Shane said, this is all being supported by middle-aged men.
Yeah. I mean, I have some Star Wars Black Series figures, and I have the Muppets, which after the Muppets, I really didn't buy toys for years, other than Legos. But this G.I. Joe line really, really hit a nerve, and it's been a lot of fun to collect. And in my head, I have this 4 foot long like diorama I want to put together to put on a shelf in here somewhere, but I just haven't started it.
They're so well detailed, these figures. I mean, that the sculpts on them are in general just that meticulously done, and
especially the faces for like Stalker, Spirit, Outback. I would even say Duke. Awesome. Dr. Major Blood is a fantastic head sculpt.
Yeah, it is.
Zartan looks great. And with Zartan, they did this really neat thing, because this is how I always thought of it, but the cartoon will have you think he has hair, but it's really what Classified did for it was a hood that he puts over his bald head. It just, there's certain tweaks and updates to the characters that they did that just make sense, where there was a little bit of ambiguity in the cartoon or the comics. They've kind of done what they can to update it and make it make sense.
My brain goes Ronan the Accuser, honestly.
Yeah. that Zartan in particular is one that with heat and cold does color change. It's not sunlight. It's not photosensitive.
I remember you mentioning that when we did this Comic Con. Yeah.
Is it the aircraft carrier that's 6 feet long? And if so, is that the biggest toy?
Yeah,
because I can't think of anything else.
I mean, you could land a Sky Striker on it.
You could probably. I think you could fit 2 or 3 Sky Strikers on it. Just in pose.
Yeah.
The next closest ones would have been the Terradrome and the Defiant, which was the space shuttle. That's massive too. I've actually never seen a Defiant other than in pictures and online. I've never seen one in person, but I've seen flags in person. I've seen Terradromes in person, and they're massive.
So let's. I want to ask, because Shane and Matt. So having watched the M.A.S.S device now as adults, how did it affect you in contrast to when you saw it when you were kids?
Oh, I still love it, and I watch it. I listen to it, and I'm not kidding here, because it's such a comfort noise in my background. At least once a week, it's playing, especially since YouTube has them all on Hasbro's One G.I. Joe site. So I just start it and play it over and over again, week after week.
Can I get my YouTube rant out of the way real quick?
Go for it.
Sure.
That's how I did it. Now, these episodes have built into them, "We'll be right back."
Yeah.
And they don't put the ads there.
Right.
No. No. I like
that is designed to irritate Levinstein.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
To me, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's just more the like it'll be mid-sentence, like right after the commercial break, and then all of a sudden you'll get 4 ads, and then you'll be back, and then whatever. That's YouTube's problem, but otherwise it's nice that these are on there for free. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the way it seems to work is every 6 months or so, it will go away. It'll be like, hey, this is not available anymore. And then maybe a month after that, Hasbro reloads it or does whatever they have to do. And then it's back for another long run. But yeah, it's been since the pandemic started that those started showing up. And I've enjoyed watching them on there every waking second I do it.
Matt, how did it strike you as an adult?
So I rewatched them after I finished reading the Marvel comics. And so it's hard for me to watch them without thinking about the inaccuracies. Like, one of the things that bothers me is I think when I would watch the cartoon in the 80s, I liked Duke because he was so prominent. Mm-hmm. But then once I read the books, it became, well, clearly Snake Eyes is the most, I thought, fleshed out character of the G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
Other than that, I preferred more of the Cobra characters, but I thought Snake Eyes was very fleshed out. So, like in this scene here, it's about Scarlett and Duke, when in the comics, it was Scarlett and Snake Eyes. And that intrigued me. And one of the things that always, I remember reading it a couple times because I thought it was so interesting, is how she's the only female in the initial group. And the other guys used to tease her all the time about being a woman. And even though she has a family of martial artists, she still got teased. And she was, I think, able to, I think to kind of get the pressure off of her, Snake Eyes and her sparred. And she knew that he let her win.
He let her win
to save face. So then he got taunted for being this expert martial artist and getting beat by Scarlett. And she knew that was just to put her in a higher position than what she was. So when I watch these cartoons now, that's the type of stuff that I think of. And that's what kind of bothers me more than is it adult? Is it for kids? Where's that line?
I think what's interesting there, Matt, you made a really good point, is that the show. See, when I look at the show now, I mean, I still love it. I mean, it's absurd, and there's so many laugh out loud moments, which I'm sure Ian can especially appreciate time and time again, which we'll get into. But like Matt, I always go back to the Marvel comic because that was as much my first experience with this world as the cartoon. I don't remember which came out first, and which I
just trying to look that up to see which one I was doing first.
Because I mean, I remember as a kid, I mean, there were two toys for me as a kid growing up in the 80s, Star Wars and G.I. Joe. I was never really a Transformers guy. And because of my fascination with military and war and history, I was so taken by G.I. Joe. But what really sold G.I. Joe for me, I didn't realize until I was later on as an adult, I read the backstory, is that G.I. Joe is very much a Marvel saturated concept.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, if you read a bit about the backstory, like Archie Goodwin, the legendary late Marvel editor, he created Cobra because Hasbro was like, all right, we got to come up with an enemy. And Goodwin said, well, why don't we create this thing called Cobra Command? That's such a Cobra, such a Marvel concept. They could be right next to, Hydra, AIM, Secret Empire, etc. And when you talk about how Hama brought help, because Hama was a Vietnam veteran, and he still is. He's still alive. Forgive me. He brought all of that, his knowledge, his experience into these stories. And Matt's point, like you really see that. You're talking about the classic. I think it's issue 26 or 27. It's the origin of Snake Eyes, and they really explore Scarlett's attraction to him and their relationship. And in the cartoon, they do establish that there's like an affection there, but he's clearly with Duke. Mm-hmm. What's interesting in the cartoon as it develops, Snake Eyes isn't really even probably shown that much in the cartoon compared to other characters. Yeah. And at some point, like Spirit almost becomes like the Snake Eyes type character later on, where in the comic, they clearly understood, okay, wow, this character is really popular because Snake Eyes in so many ways is a Marvel character, the way he's portrayed in the comic. And they really ran with his history and what made him so interesting. And of course, when they get to the silent interlude issue, which is one of the most important comic books of the 1980s period, issue 21, that really establishes like, wow, G.I. Joe, ninjas, 1980s zeitgeist, I'm all in, baby. So, yeah.
Well, can I say, I don't, did you guys see the solo movie that came out, I think last year for Snake Eyes?
I did not.
No.
Yep.
So I didn't see it. And
it was painful.
One of the reasons why, I heard that they portray him as a dick.
Oh yeah.
Like, wait a minute. But one of the things that I liked about the character in the comics was he was that outsider learning the martial arts. And I guess to be culturally appropriate, they went with an actual, it was Henry Golding as Snake Eyes. And I remember seeing stuff and I'm just like, it doesn't feel like Snake Eyes to me, just what I'm seeing. Like I understand if you wanted to get away from the Caucasian trope, but I think they could have, if they were going to go that route, make it anybody. I felt the same way about Danny Rand in the Netflix Iron Fist, because I remember that they said you should cast an Asian person. I kept thinking that seems like a stereotype. So if you're not going to do Caucasian, that's fine. But don't go for the stereotype. Pick like Hispanic or African American, still do what you want to do without seeing. And that's one of the reasons. So just circling back, that's one of the things that I liked about Snake Eyes is he was very outside. It seemed like he was an outsider the majority of his life. Yeah. Once his family got killed, he learned the martial arts where he's the outsider. And then even on the G.I. Joe, he's stoic. He can't talk. He's part of the team, but he's still the outsider because he's a sphinx. He has all this stuff about him that some people know who his backstory, some of who he was in Vietnam and stuff, and some don't. But that's one of the things that I really liked reading that character.
And Matt raised another great point is that in the comic version, as it develops, but even with the first issue, it's very much rooted in the time and when the comic is being crafted. Like many of the Joes are Vietnam veterans. Yeah. Like Hawk is, Stalker is, Snake Eyes is, Storm Shadow is. Some of the other members are younger, but you really feel the weight of their experience. Like even in that first story, like when you read the first issue of G.I. Joe, I mean, I read it when I was 9 when it came out. I got it shortly thereafter. Like I didn't fully understand everything he was talking about. Like I didn't know what concertina wire was. I didn't know what a battalion was. Like in that first issue, do you all agree that Hama is not writing down to the audience?
No, he's not.
He's writing up.
Yeah.
And he's writing a war comic that just happens to be selling action figures and their vehicles and accessories. But it has this aspect to it, especially as read as an older person, that is so much more satisfying. As much as I still love the cartoons, they are dopey and they're ads for toys, but they're still fun. But the comic has a weight to it that, like in that first issue, like you have like this nuclear physicist who's like torn about, should I be supporting the government's policies? And like a 9-year-old kid, I'm like, oh wow. And then as I get older, I'm like, wow, this is pretty sophisticated, like what they're talking about here. And I would tell people who haven't read the book, like, don't be kind of fooled by like the toy trappings, because when you get into it, especially, and Shane, I'm sure will agree, the first 50 or so issues.
Oh, I would even go first 60 to 75.
Yeah. Like they're really like Hama and the artists like walk this line between, okay, we have to like always make sure all these vehicles are showing up because Hasbro and all this, but they're also telling really engaging stories that as a kid I love, but then when you go back as an adult, I'm like, wow, there's some really interesting stuff going on in these stories.
And it was truly episodic in that things that would happen in the beginning of the series would continue throughout and have ramifications as the series went on.
Well, the two things that I wanted to point out, going back to Storm Shadow real quick. I think. Oh, sorry, why did I say Storm Shadow? I meant Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes, real quick, is I did appreciate that Mass Device had a Snake Eyes arc. That we still had, his Luke Skywalker meets Yoda.
Where Major Blood makes one of the worst tactical decisions of all time and lets Snake Eyes live. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
He'll be dead.
As he's nursed back to health, essentially, and gets his his wolf friend, and that was good because it did establish that Snake Eyes is going to mean something, that he's not just one of the Joes, and I appreciated that for what it was. Going into the first issue of the comic, which this was my first time reading.
Wow, great.
I was surprised as to how much I could relate the first issue to the M.A.S.S Device arc, because the story is a little bit similar. The fact that there's that there's at least some sort of nuclear thing going on. I mean, that's basically what the M.A.S.S Device, when you think about it, is like. It's this massive weapon.
They're going to incinerate cities with it.
Yeah, incinerate cities, and same sort of thing there. The only thing is that there's less of a fetch quest going on, because the M.A.S.S Device itself is a fetch quest where they're gathering together the Dragon Balls in order to then make their wish, essentially.
Right.
But with the comic, it's just more about rescuing this scientist, and is this scientist a traitor? Is it not? So on and so forth. But you can tie that into the story. It's just the M.A.S.S Device is just more for kids, while Larry Hama's first issue is most definitely not.
Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say the other thing that it's a little hard for me to go back and watch the comics as opposed to reading the books out. I don't know how much you enjoyed the first issue, Ian. I thought it started to really pick up closer to issue 10 of that series, because after that, by issue 10, it was hard for me to put it down because I was getting the trade. But I found, so whenever I watched cartoon, it was always Cobra's this terrorist organization trying to take over the world. And when we read the book, it's the origins of it and how it built, and that their main thing was just, we're going to make a money. And then to quote,
Cobra's a big pyramid scheme, essentially.
Yeah, is we're going to make a shitload of money. We're going to sell these terror drones that you can build easily and stuff like that. And you're like, this does not seem like the same type of, even though it was comical, terrorist organization that I was lead to believe in the comics.
Yeah.
This was more like, we're just building a company. We built this island as our base. We put all the legal paperwork in, so now we own this island, so no one can take it from us. And if you step one here, it's international law that's going to kick in. And they're just they're funding quote unquote bad guys, and that's always subjective. But that's how they're going to just make a ton of money.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point, Matt. One of the biggest contrasts to emphasize that, and I look forward to Ian's opinion, especially because it's his first time. The way Cobra Commander is portrayed in the M.A.S.S device versus the way he's portrayed in issue 1 of the comic is night and day.
Oh, absolutely.
So the cartoon, he's like, Destro is clearly the more competent strategist and tactician, and he's clearly more of a charismatic leader of men and so forth. And Cobra Commander is obviously, he's built this organization, but he's like, he's the Popinjay. He's vain. He's conceited.
Yeah.
He makes sometimes really bad decisions. The Cobra Commander in issue 1 is a clearly very Machiavellian, very shrewd. He anticipates all the moves that JoJo's are going to take throughout the assault. He has this whole scheme in place. He's much more of a classic Marvel type master planner villain. Ian, what'd you think?
I would agree. I also think that not having Destro there essentially gave Cobra Commander more to do.
Yeah, good point.
That it's basically Cobra Commander, and then his second in command is the Baroness. At least that's presented in this first issue. Love the Baroness in this, by the way. She immediately takes charge and is a strong female presence for the book, which, even though she's, evil as heck, I fully appreciate. He's much less of a bumbling buffoon who just happens to have power in this first issue here. He actually feels like he could be a menace in and of himself, as opposed to Cobra itself being the menace.
And in the cartoon, I love Destro in the cartoon because there's kind of a bit of like the Darth Vader allure and the mask and the funky like disco whatever he's wearing with the amulet and that whole thing. But like whenever he's on screen and he's leading the Cobra forces, you're like, oh, you know what? The Joes might lose. Like he's clearly more capable. Like when they go to the volcano and like a champagne cork, and I love it. And they get the meat right out of there and they good villain.
They couldn't figure out his accent too until about maybe like the third episode, because it kept slipping almost Connery. And then like they kind of figured out like maybe we're not going that Scottish route, and then it was a little bit more commanding than it started out. But that can happen. I mean, look at Homer Simpson, season 1 versus Homer Simpson now.
Sure.
Figure out the accents and all that.
I thought even Cobra Commander, he had more of a S slur in the M.A.S.S device than I remembered through the majority of preceding episodes.
Two different actors. I think the guy who did it for the M.A.S.S device passed away.
Oh,
and then that's why they got a new guy. I'm pretty sure.
Is it Eric Latta?
I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure I just read that in recent months.
Because I think the only time I heard a lot of sounds is there is an unspoken, not unspoken, but there's an episode of the Transformers post the movie.
Oh, he's Starscream, isn't he? The same voice actor.
The same actor.
The second actor,
But there is a character and it's a one-off episode. Later, it had Hot Rod in it, RC Springer, where they lose their Autobot bodies and be put into human bodies. But the human that helps the organization, I think it was, that was doing that, they called the Snake. And at the end, he said, like, I had all this technology available to me and when all this stuff, but at the end it was Cobra. It was clearly Cobra Commander, who was a homeless person later down the line.
Great. And I think what's also interesting, I think, between the first issue and the cartoon is how Cobra is portrayed. So the Cobra of the cartoon, to me, is it's the like anodyne. Okay, they want to take over the world, and it's, they have all the colorful equipment, and they look cool, and they have these nondescript weird laser weapons that don't actually exist, and it's fun. The Cobra of the comic book, I find, obviously because it's more sophisticated, is really far more sinister and well, for example, their troops massacre an entire fishing village.
Yeah,
they don't show you killing those people, but they kill everybody.
I fully was not expecting to open up this issue and have a moral debate on whether or not G.I. Joe was going to free the dead. Like, that is a very different G.I. Joe than what I grew up with. Not a bad thing, but it's just, damn, yeah, you're right. Larry Hama was very much unafraid of doing a war comic here, and that is the first tell of it. Like, damn, that's dark. That's dark.
Yeah, and Ian, that's great, because that's a great point too, because Hama, you're right, because Hama, this is a war comic. It just happens also to be selling toys, but he makes it's very much a war comic. And like when they're debating about whether they should they even rescue Burkhardt, why they just blow up the island and kill her, she's a traitor, and Hawk says, wait a minute, we were supposed to uphold the Constitution. Like, wow. Like in this first issue, and I didn't get all that when I was 9, but as you keep reading it, then you realize there's a lot going on in this book. And as Shane was mentioning before, as the series, and Matt mentioned this too, as the series progresses and the stories become more interconnected, you really start to feel the weight of Cobra and what Cobra's objectives are. Like Matt mentioned, did any of you guys read the hot potato story at the end of issue 1? The short story that's at the end of it?
I did a long time ago, not recently.
So it's just a short story where Scarlett, Rock and Roll, and Snake Eyes are in a Middle Eastern mission, and they're basically fighting an analog of Muammar Gaddafi.
Okay.
And they have to like get this you'll find this very quaint, Ian, that this tape out of the country, which has vital information against this dictator. And they mention how Cobra is financing this dictator. You don't actually see Cobra at all in the story, but they're there, like, behind the scenes. So what's fun about the comic as it progresses is that even issues where they don't directly deal with Cobra is clearly in the background,
trying something.
And as Shane and Matt mentioned, it's about profit, right? They're always trying to sell weapons. They're trying to cause upheaval in a certain country so they can gain some kind of advantage from that. Basically, Cobra's like a country for all intents and purposes. And again, it's this cult of personality around Cobra Commander himself.
Yeah.
But the book, the first issue, I think, and Ian, again, I'm glad you pointed out, when you have the scene where they're debating about should we bury these poor people the Cobra just murdered, and Stalker's like, we got to continue with the missions. They just leave the bodies there, but that lets you know that, all right, this book is not going to be what maybe people thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and shouldn't be dismissed today even as something comical.
Yeah, it's not some let's just sell toys. It's not a marketing scheme. I mean, that's part of it, but there's something a lot deeper going on. Especially, I think it's because Hama was given so much leeway to basically create everything. Like, he created all of these characters, their personalities, and everything.
So, sorry, just butt in for 2 seconds here, Shane.
Please.
Looking at the costumes of the Joes in the comic versus
pure Herb Trimpe.
Oh my God. But also the fact that I feel like they're more war uniforms.
Yeah, they
are in the animation, because really nothing stands out about them here. Like, this doesn't scream to me, this is going to be a toy. Like, they're almost army men when you look at it, because they're all wearing the same color green except for Scarlett.
And Snake Eyes, yeah.
And Snake Eyes, and nothing really stands out there. I'm sure as time went on, that was no longer the case in the comics, because then they wanted to make it look more like what people expected from the toys. But that's what struck me immediately here. Is like no, this is more of a task force. They've got literal army uniforms that they're wearing.
And what's great, I mean, I've loved the late great Herb Trimpe's art since I was a kid. I don't know, when I saw his Hulk stories, for example. Trimpe always, when he draws stuff involving the military weapons, his artwork is always kind of a hybrid of stuff that's based on real stuff. There's always a bit of fantasy attached to it as well. Like some of the weapons aren't fully real. Like they're kind of based on weapons that do exist, but he always kind of tweaks them a little bit. Like Flash's laser rifle, for example.
Yeah.
Like the Baroness is like cool, like camera gun when they kidnap Burkhart. That's very Herb Trimpe if you look at all his work throughout his career. And so it adds that little bit of that kind of superhero twinge to the whole thing too. Like their uniforms aren't, like, for the most part, they're not real military uniforms. Like they're not wearing bright yellow boots, for example. Right. But like Ian said, you could kind of see them as like, all right, they kind of can see them as actual military fatigues and uniforms and so forth. And I love that kind of balance they created there, because it is a comic book.
Sure.
But there's enough of reality to remind you that, okay, that this is more than just toys. And like, as I said in the first issue, Hama's constantly dropping like terms about the military, weaponry, geopolitical stuff. And that just continues and builds as the book goes on. So
now the first issue of G.I. Joe was released in March of 1982. That's the release date. Full
pun intended. That's clutch. Continue.
Now, then the M.A.S.S cartoon came out in 1983. I can't find a specific date. Maybe September 1983, which is kind of what I remember. G.I. Joe issue 21 was December of 1983 with a cover date of March of 84. I can remember watching the cartoon, seeing the commercials on TV. First of all, I can remember that, and for the comic books. So that's going back to 82. Whereas a year plus later, you have the first miniseries, and then a few months later, you have issue 21. So all of that's happening around the time when I'm starting to get into this. So I never read issue 1 when it was released, but I remember the cartoon commercials. Then I remember watching the M.A.S.S device, and then around Thanksgiving, went to a hoagie shop with my dad, and I've told this story on the show. Looking across the street was a G.I. Joe advertisement in the window, and I thought, oh, well, that's the cartoon I just watched. I got to go check that out. Went in there and found this issue of G.I. Joe.
Clutch.
Now, I didn't buy it then, and this is not that copy. A couple weeks later, I was sick, and my dad asked if I needed anything. They were going to go to the hoagie shop again, and I said, "You know what, Dad? I'd really like that G.I. Joe comic that we were looking at in the store," because he walked over with me when he was done at the hoagie shop, and then he said, "Okay," and he went off and get it. When he came back, he couldn't find it because in that time this had been released. So I get this when he gets home, and I'm totally lost because there's no words. Now, this is not that copy either. I wish I had my original copy. I don't. But
it's a nice shape, Shane.
Yeah, it's a second or third print of it that somebody had gifted me.
Yeah.
But that's where I started reading G.I. Joe, was with this issue.
Wow, what introduction.
Then I went back and started looking at the older issues. So much so that a friend of mine in school, I was in 8th grade at the time, and he had this original copy of G.I. Joe issue number 1, a first print. Again, this is 8th grade, 1983, 84. I bought it off of him for $6. I snowed shovel in my neighbor's driveways to be able to pay for this comic.
The 80s.
It is the original one that I've had since day one.
Well, you broke your back to get it.
Yeah. So seeing the cartoon and then reading this, kind of forgetting what the cartoon had to do about it. But then the following year, when The Revenge of Cobra was released, they also re-released the M.A.S.S device before it. And I'm watching it going, well, now wait a minute. Why is Scarlett going after Duke? Because she's with Snake Eyes in the comic, because everything I was reading was like we've talked about, so different. Mm-hmm. It was recognizable, but it was much different. Yeah. So that really definitely intrigued me about the difference between the two. I thoroughly enjoyed the kiddiness of the cartoon and the toy promotions that followed and ensued because of it. But I really was just enthralled with the comic book and the storytelling in it. And I stuck with this comic right through, gosh, I want to say 75, issue 80, maybe even 85 before I really started to go, I don't know about this. And then eventually gave up on it. And then I got rid of all of those comics because I was getting into superhero comics, DC comics, Marvel superhero comics. I kept issue 1, and that is really the only original issue of mine that I have left. All these other ones are ones that people gifted me or I've gotten at a con or whatever, second prints. One thing that was I was thrilled with, and I didn't jump on the bandwagon at first, but I searched for them over the last 5 years. And I believe there's 9 volumes. I now have 8 of them. The first 8 are these fantastic
awesome.
IDW
Awesome.
hardcover complete collection tomes. This is volume 4. That's what I'm in the middle of reading right now. There's so much gray matter in between each issue to read. It's so much fun, so fantastic. If you can find them, great, because even finding some of the trade paperbacks that IDW put out of the original Marvel stuff is hard to come by. But just a fantastic story. And issue 1 is just, it's just that the impetus of everything. And like's been mentioned before, it's so mature and so talking up about storytelling, not talking down to kids. And you can just watch these stories unfold, the writing, the artwork. It is just intricate, intriguing storytelling through and through, right from the start. And
the most obvious contrast we can talk about, obviously, between the two forms of media is that in the comic, people die.
Yeah. People
Ian,
die, people go away.
Ian, what do you think about that contrast?
So I think that it makes sense. For one thing, that I don't think the comics, or at least in the 80s, I don't necessarily believe that Marvel Comics were putting things out for 8-year-olds. And it shows, in Spider-Man comics at the time and X-Men comics at the time.
G.I. Joe was not a star comic. That's true.
Right. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And I think that they know who they were aiming for, and they were aiming for, upper teens, 20s, that sort of
Sure.
scenario. So it would make perfect sense that there would be differences. Also, we know, and I brought up standards and practices earlier, and I will say it again, that standards and practices were sons of bitches when it came to what was allowed on TV and what was not through the 80s and 90s. And it would have to be different, period. But it's not even that. It's the fact that when you're selling toys, times change. Now they're selling toys to people our age, but at the time they were selling toys to people our age back then.
Yeah, right.
So, of course, if you're trying to sell the toys to kids, then you're going to want to get your animated series to be more child-oriented at the same time. So you're not going to be bloody, you're not going to be violent, unless you're Gremlins, and that's beside the point.
It's a great Christmas movie.
Oh, absolutely.
I have to say, because I know we keep kind of looking at the show, the cartoon, as being childish, but I think about that. Maybe it potentially could be like their most mature. I think 2 episodes. Yeah. But when they go to that alternate reality, where the G.I. Joes died, and
that's
then some of the originals
where Cobra won.
Stay.
Yeah.
And I remember watching that. I think it was interesting when I was a kid, and then rewatching it as I was rereading these issues, and I'm like, I don't remember this being as adult themed, and maybe in hindsight it's not, but just I'm thinking about the whole concept of it and what it meant, and that they wanted to stay behind because Cobra had won. It's a losing battle, but you know what? We belong here. The Joes need to survive.
Yeah.
And just thinking that seemed a little bit more adult than I remembered. when I watched them in the 80s.
Something that they did around that time, and they did this a couple times, and Steeler in that episode is a perfect example, because at the same time or close to that time in the comic book, Steeler was being written out of the comic.
They're running on a bunch of the characters, actually.
And some
because they had to make room for new characters,
right? And some of those were the ones that stayed behind in that alternate reality in the cartoon. So it still gave it some legitimacy and further adventures of what those characters could be dealing with, without thinking that they just died, without just making them disappear and not knowing what happened. You have some kind of storytelling surrounding that in a morally decision-making, decisive way that benefited those characters.
To piggyback on that, there was another great two-parter in that long season, we'll call it, of the original series. I'm sure Shane and Matt will remember this one. I don't know if Ian saw it, but where Shipwreck, who was a character they prominently used a lot in that series.
He was prominent in the cartoon, not as much in the comic.
No, but in the cartoon, Cobra makes him think he's living in an alternate reality where he's married. Lady J was killed.
The Synthoids.
And I think that two part was written by Steve Gerber, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
So that's another reason why it was good. But they definitely, in the show, as the show progressed, they did start to go into some more sort of sophisticated, and no one really still died, but more sophisticated plots.
And in that two-part in particular, there's actual toned down torture and interrogation happening.
That's right.
Throughout.
That's true.
To try and get information out of Shipwreck that's supposedly stored in his head.
Yeah.
As well as torture techniques like
they want to know where the G.I. Joe headquarters is.
Drugging him.
Yeah.
Well, and they're trying to get a formula out of his head that
because he knows the location of Springfield, the Cobra Central, right?
Well,
isn't that what it is?
In the beginning of the episode, he and Lady J are safeguarding a scientist.
Right.
And as Cobra's attacking where they're trying to hide out and escape from, the scientist takes what looks like a little mini plunger, plops it on Shipwreck's head, and puts a formula in his head, in his memory,
right,
that Lady J then knows the password to get it out.
That's right.
So then Cobra captures Shipwreck, the other two escape, and they're trying to convince Shipwreck that it's years have gone by, it's no big deal, just release this information. And it's Dr. Delaney maybe or something. And all the while there's a synthoid Polly trying to egg him on to release this information.
It's good.
All kinds of nightmares and craziness going on.
Jumping back to the M.A.S.S device. What, Ian, I want to ask you about this. So when they have the Gladiator Arena and they have like the Atari joysticks that they're using, like, how did you react to that the whole slave pens, all that stuff?
Now,
that's what an Atari was.
First off, loved it for the cheesiness of it all. And again, I'll just go back. Was not expecting nearly as many mentions of slavery. In this first miniseries as we got. The fact that the Duke love interest was
Duke's got two women going after him in this miniseries.
Yeah. And Scarlett's just like, okay, hey, not now, sister. We've got work to do. And then Duke's like, hey, I brought you this because I thought you'd like it, and it's her crossbow. It's like it was a little weird.
Gee, thanks. Like it's all right. I'll get to you later. Right now, I'm dealing with my slave love.
Yeah.
Who I gave my school ring to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which nobody noticed that was missing, and yet that's the only thing that had the microchip to tell them where to go.
It was easily the most early 80s of it all, that because no way in hell would that terminology fly today.
No.
And I mean, they would be prisoners rather than slaves, definitely. And also, I don't know, it rubbed me. I wouldn't quite say that it rubbed me the wrong way, but it also put Cobra in an interesting light because, in the comics, they're, mass murdering people and all that. And here they're keeping slaves. So
yes, and yet the slaves,
they're super duper bad. Yeah.
And yet the slaves the entire time have something that they could use to break Cobra's control and escape, but yet they just wait to give it to Duke.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just one little thing that I've always wondered about in my adult life, watching it, going, well, how many of these gold strips do they have? Because it seems like they got a lot of them. kind of
she's
hidden
wearing
away.
gold now, isn't she?
What's that?
She's wearing a gold ring. She could have melted that thing down.
Well, no, that's Duke's ring, but inside
Right.
the band, she's already got the gold strip in, because they talk about it when she gives it to Duke. Hey, if you put this in here, you can resist Cobra's control. It's going to hurt a little bit, but it's okay. Kind of like, hey, we've got a dozen of these. Well, what took so long to escape then?
They got some in the stock room.
Yeah.
Also, the headbands were easily the most Marvel thing in the entire thing.
Yeah.
All I can think of was the mutant inhibitors. And that's 100% what they were going with that.
Yep.
I also loved thinking of the scenes when Duke escapes once again. Like he's drawing the Cobra Troopers like, he's finished. We're gonna get a bonus for this.
Yeah.
They keep making these decisions, obviously because they have to for the show, but they keep making decisions that are going to ensure that whichever Joe in question is actually going to survive to gum up the works of their plans later. Like the sequence where, as you mentioned, the whole Arctic sequence, one of my favorite sequences in the whole that whole miniseries. I think it looks great. I love the different weaponry the Cobra brings to that expedition, and just when Snake Eye sacrifices himself, but when he's staggering out of the cavern and he has like the mask
the canister.
in the canister,
yeah.
And Major Blood out of characters tells his soldiers, well, he's finished. Just let him go, the poor devil. I'm like, no, you shoot him, then you take the canister.
Right.
Well, that's the thing, because they still needed that stuff.
Right.
They just sent the robots
still had to go in to get it. Yeah.
My favorite part of the entire miniseries, easily, without a shadow of a doubt, is Cobra Commander willy-nilly using the device left and right, and being told, well, we're going to deplete. And he's like, it'll be fine. They
don't know that.
Don't you worry about that. We can just use smoke and mirrors. It's fine. Everything's fine. And then he wants to destroy New York. And like, wait a minute, I only have this much power left? Well, crap.
But you also have to think one of the similarities that the comic does have with the cartoon, as much as the cartoon was campy-ish, you still had where, in order to destroy New York and get the signal from the M.A.S.S device to New York, somebody had to place a homing beacon somewhere. So that person is sacrificing themselves.
So they got the Eiffel Tower.
No matter what. If they're going to destroy it. No, the Eiffel Tower, transporting
or the entire Soviet Red Army.
Right. So there's a way to save people, but for the person that was placing the thing in New York, they were going to die just right along with the rest of New York.
But Shane, let me rescue that one. So as you know, when you read it on in the comic, they really established that the Cobra rank and file, like they are.
Oh, they're fodder.
They're fanatical, like they're devoted to Cobra Commander. And they will sacrifice their lives. And there are issues where that happens. They sacrifice their lives for him. So the comic goes into that and it's far more sinister. Where they really reveal like this guy has like basically created this massive cult, which is devoted to this. He's a salesman. Yeah, he's a salesman, and he's created this cult of personality. And that the whole town, because Cobra, of course, is headquartered in the town of Springfield. Yep. Everything revolves around that.
These aren't stormtroopers. Like these are not guys who are just there to get a paycheck. It's a lot more than that.
And go ahead, Coach.
As you read, I know this is beyond issue 1, but as you read, there's a whole subplot of the Fred storyline for the Crimson Guards that's just fantastic throughout the whole series.
Well, they're meant to infiltrate American business, politics, everything. Yep. What were you gonna say, Matt? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say because when you're talking about the uniforms that they would wear and stuff like that, I get why Cobra had foot soldiers essentially. What I never understood is G.I. Joe is supposed to be this elite, the best of the best with honors commando unit. But then you would always see they had like grunts who basically just wore the green fatigue
in the cartoon.
Like, are they just on loan?
I think that was to flesh out. That's just to flesh out battles.
Yeah, that's their support.
It just always seemed like, in my mind, the G.I. Joe, every member should have some type of speciality.
And in the comic, that was the case.
I understand you might have 2 water guys, but at the same time, it's like, would it just be like a regular guy who couldn't quite make the cut to have his own cool code name and cool uniform, but he's still good enough to be in the Joes themselves.
That's their rank and file grunts.
Yeah, and I always took it just like Jedi. Jedi were the generals over top of the clone troopers. That's what the Joes were. They were the elite commanders of all the grunts. So if they had to infiltrate something in a precise fashion, you'd send the commandos, the Joes. But if you needed a mass battle, you'd send in
for example, when Stalker's doing that fake surrender video and Gung Ho is playing with the toys in the background, which is great. And they have like a massive army, which is supposed to be G.I. Joe, that they're surrendering to Cobra. Yeah. So they have that whole side of it. I wanted to point out a couple things though about this cartoon that I forgot how much I enjoyed. First of all, I think the score was great. Mm-hmm. I think the music in this cartoon is really well done.
Oh, it's epic.
What'd you think, Ian?
I really enjoyed it. There was nothing about the music I disliked. It wasn't quite integral to it, but it was there to drive what you're seeing, and I appreciate that sort of score.
And then there was, there's like a Destro theme, Cobra theme, and there's like the action theme. There's like the jazzy G.I. Joe is hip theme, and it's just fun. And the other thing that struck me, because they're obviously using a limited number of voice actors, like you can tell, like when Duke is playing a Cobra officer, for example. But I love how they tried to create like these very distinct, like regional accents. Like I guess Snow Job is from Boston. I'm guessing. Not sure where Torpedo is from. Short Fuse sounds like he's from some, I don't know, borough of New York.
I remember Steelers definitely from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, you're right.
Nearly as bad as Joey Wheeler from Brooklyn.
What did you? Again, I'm not sure how far down rabbit holes we're going here. Did you? So I like the idea of Cobra being started by this salesman and developing a cult. Do you kind of? I guess if you're going to suspend disbelief between the comics and how things developed in the series, did you like that he came from Cobra Law, or at that point
I hated that?
This is just
that was
hated that.
I mean, I like the movie for what it is, but it was a terrible direction to go in.
I think the idea of Cobra Law is easily the most ridiculous thing.
Yeah.
What the hell is Burgess Meredith doing in that movie? Holy mackerel.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Orson Welles did
Unicron.
Unicron.
Oh, see, real quick, just to throw this in there before I forget, Shane, September 12th, 1983. That's when Mass Device premiered.
Clutch.
Okay.
And it was indeed Christopher Collins all the way through. So as Cobra Commander, at least according to every single thing I found.
That's what I was looking up too, and I can't figure out how. Mm-hmm. When some of those episodes were well after he passed away.
Yeah, he was alive until, let me see, Christopher Collins.
I think it was 84.
No, he did not. It was in the 90s.
Really?
Looking here, he died in 1994.
Wonder where I read that then.
Mm-hmm.
Was he an older man, or was he?
He died. Actually, he died young. Yeah, he died. He was only 44 years old.
Oh, geez!
Wow.
And mind you, he'd been in Next Generation and Deep Space Nine as well. He had a stand-up comedy on top of his voice work. But yeah, no, he died very suddenly from the looks of it.
Does it say what he died from?
Cerebral hemorrhage.
Oh, jeez.
I have to ask. So, did anyone else besides myself prepping for this episode, because we're talking about the M.A.S.S device, follow up with the Ballad of G.I. Joe that College Humor put out like 14 years ago?
No.
Oh, I didn't. I'd forgotten that existed, to be honest with you.
Okay. All right. So that's something you can, even if you just.
Oh, yeah. I was humming it in my head. Yeah. Cobra's got the M.A.S.S device. Yeah.
No, that I don't think I've seen that.
Just on YouTube, because I forgot what it was called. You can put G.I. Joe Olivia Wilde, or Olivia Wilde Baroness, because she plays that role in that little short, and it's a nice little compliment to this to the first season of the first.
Right. Yeah. Holy crap. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me where it's from. Zach Galifianakis plays Snowjob. Tony Bender. Wow. Yeah. Julianne Moore.
Alan, was it Tunic or something like that does the shipwreck?
Yes.
Right,
Alan
from
Tudyk,
the
Shipwreck. Yeah. Olivia Wilde, like you mentioned, as Baroness. Man, yeah. I am watching this immediately after.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen this.
I've never seen that either.
Oh, the Cobra Commander likes Three Dog Night.
Yep.
What is the loneliest number?
Wow.
And wait, who does? Is it Billy Crump that does Zartan?
Yeah, Billy.
Love me for being me.
Yes, Billy Crudup is Zartan.
And this is called The Ballad of G.I. Joe?
Ballad of
Ballad of G.I. Joe.
Yep. It's a Funny or Die video.
Wow. Okay.
There's
Check that out.
all kinds of top talent in this. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
From 2009. Yep. Oh, what did we all think of the amazing glow when in the Arctic scene that stuck there until magic.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Even Snake Eyes is totally irradiated?
Anytime you had that kind of a glow, and you had it for the elements of the M.A.S.S device, you had it for certain electronic gizmos that were in Cobra and G.I. Joe's purview. I like that effect. Just the way it is.
It's pretty cool.
Somebody said that I was thinking of Light from Batman Beyond when I recently watched this.
Mm-hmm.
But,
what's even better is
that was one of the things.
Go ahead, Matt.
He was going to die because of the radiation, but then clearly he didn't. So it was what. And if he had that kind of radiation, I guess he wouldn't be warming up. I could think of would he be melting the area around him, but I guess he's not generating the radiation.
No, he's just infected.
With the radiation.
Yeah.
I'm just glad he didn't turn into the Incredible Hulk, because that's another thing that could have happened.
Right.
Same animation company.
Exactly.
Well, doesn't the what do they call the character, Shane? The giant man who saves him. Does he have a name in this episode?
No.
The
just the mysterious woodland man.
The woodland man.
I don't think he's ever been given a name.
Does he heal him? Do they go into that, or they just magically?
he wraps Snake Eyes in something that draws the radiation out.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah,
maybe he's
blind man who normally have it.
Some kind of herbs or something.
Me of in the first couple issues where Snake Eyes gets separated from the team, and he hooks up with a bounty hunter.
Quinn the Eskimo. Yeah, Quinn the Eskimo.
Yeah, so some of that aspect reminded me of that portion of the comics.
I fully expected Quinn to show up in the cartoons after going in and reading the comics. And there was never a Quinn action figure until Super 7's 5 POA 3 3/4 recent in the last year or two figure. But there was never a Quinn figure before that.
Yeah, he was a pure Hama creation.
Yep. I'm still also waiting, again, down a whole nother rabbit hole. I'm also waiting for Classified. I'm waiting for something to come back in a more, I know they've been in some of the more recent comics, but I want the October Guard too to show up.
Oh God. So Ian,
Russia's antithesis.
Ian, when you reading, was this your first time reading issue 1, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I get the impression that you enjoyed it overall.
I enjoyed it. Yeah. I think that, it does have a lot of the trappings of a first issue, as they have to introduce everybody. We have to get the real names of the characters that we're immediately going to forget because all we care about is the code names.
Yeah,
it's an establishing issue, and I'm perfectly okay with that. And yeah, way more grounded and dark than I was expecting, but not necessarily a bad thing. And the art is gorgeous. So what's not to like, frankly.
Would it compel you in an alternate reality to, when you have more time, to read subsequent issues? Like, yeah.
I would think so. I mean, I'm not sure how much I would get into it, but I think that there is enough compelling here to investigate, and I might even wind up, to be honest with you, I might even wind up just binging a whole bunch of the animated series too, because it's been a while.
Yeah.
And it's all there.
And I want to say, I can't say that every episode is on YouTube on Hasbro's thing, but there's a good 50 of them on or something.
I think also a bunch of it is on Tubi.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Maybe whatever's not there
might be.
Well, When I think of the animated series, I always think of, we mentioned the two-part of the shipwreck, the two-part of the alternate reality, the two-part of they think Dusty's a traitor, which is also really good.
Which I think is called The Traitor.
Yeah, when they're trying to get Excalibur, which is just totally goofy and fun. It's just totally ridiculous.
Is that the one with the ghosts?
No, that's a different one.
Okay.
This one where they actually find Excalibur, and Cobra and G.I. Joe are both fighting over Excalibur.
What about the Dreadnoks playing as a rock band?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, what are they called? Cold Slither.
Cold Slither.
The song's like Cold Slither. We'll be joining you soon.
And one of my favorites, which when I liked, when I think about it, I think that the animation they must have had a better budget for because it looks better. Is the episode where Cobra Commander constructs what he calls my fun house, and the Joes are then trapped inside the fun house.
Oh, nice.
If you watch it, the animation is just better on that particular episode. It just is.
So it's basically he goes arcade like that.
Yes, he is arcade. Yep. Yes.
But nothing will ever beat the Viper. The Viper.
Oh, the Vindo Viper. Oh my God. That is one of my favorite episodes. The Amazon in the last 2 years had that whole first Sunbow collection on sale for like $20 or $25. And I never owned all of them. I had like the Mass Device, the Revenge of Cobra, the Pyramid of Darkness, but I never had the whole series. And when I found them on YouTube, and that was not one of them that was on there, when I saw that series go on sale at Amazon, I snatched it up just to watch the Viper episode. Oh, it's just fantastic.
And let's not forget the Toy Master.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a very Marvel episode.
Oh yeah, Is that the one that pairs up Flint, Baroness, Cobra Commander, and Lady J?
Yes.
Yes. It's fantastic.
And go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in one of the episodes, and I always misremember what Shipwreck said, and even today I'm not sure completely, but I kind of whenever things go from bad to worse for me, I always hearken to what I thought Shipwreck said. But something happened in an episode where he goes out of the frying pan into the toilet. But that's not what he says, but it was something along those lines. So now when something's going wrong for me and something gets even worse, that's the first thing I think of: out of the frying pan and into the toilet.
Well, I'll tell you, watching this also just gave me a greater appreciation of one of my favorite shows of all time, and that, of course, is the Venture Brothers, and their use of the OSI. Their G.I. Joe and of course their version of Shipwreck that's just 100%.
Wow.
and it's delightful. But if you haven't watched Venture Brothers, it's well worth a watch just as fans of comic books, because eventually there's a season where they wind up in New York and there's a whole bunch of analogs for Marvel heroes running around, including a Spider-Man that actually shoots webs out of his ass. His voice
well, isn't there a G.I. Joe-esque episode of like Parks and Rec or something also?
Oh, no. Community.
Okay. Yeah, which I've never seen yet. I have to find that and watch it.
So good. Yeah, there's a fully animated episode of Community where they're all essentially in G.I. Joe, and it's delightful.
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, but Venture Brothers, amazing, well worth your time. The OSI is just perfect.
Well, and I'm not going to pull out my first issue here, but something I was thinking of, and I wanted to ask if it's right or not, partially because I have hand cream on my hands because it's winter and they're chapped, and it'll eat away at the comics. This is printed on better paper than the rest of the series.
Yeah, it's Baxter paper.
It was just I wish they would have printed more of it on this
Baxter
paper.
In that time period, Marvel, I think DC did some of these too. I don't know a lot about the history of the paper, but they were using this paper called Baxter paper in certain comics. In fact, gentlemen, I just came back from Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, and I want us all to do a micro spotlight on the first 12 issues of the Micronauts. Ooh. And Marvel did a series of reprints in the early 80s where they put arcs in they're like $250 a book on Baxter paper. They did Adam Warlock, they did Captain Marvel, and they did the Micronauts. And I got a second set of those, which I'll circulate them on the group so we can all read them.
Yeah, I don't think I ever read any
because
Micronauts.
you can't get Micronauts. I doubt it's on the Marvel site because they probably can't use the name anymore and anything like that. But
Yeah,
that's Baxter Paper. So,
and I know, like Legion of Superheroes had a Baxter Paper run, Titans had a Baxter Paper run, but I don't remember it just ever being just one issue. It was always a series.
Yeah,
but yet this was just on this one issue.
This is the first comic that had an animated commercial behind it, so it makes sense they just put a little bit more into the appearance and the presentation of the first issue.
Also, a note: Baxter Paper, for anybody wondering exactly what it was that made it so unique, is that it was heavy, it was acid free, and it was super white. So you were able to get like better colors, and the stock itself was a heavier stock than what a normal page was.
Yeah.
Just to keep that in mind.
Ladies and gentlemen, that right then and there is why we revere Levinstein. That's the producer. Well done, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Well done indeed. The cartoon, it struck me because I hadn't watched it in a while, how bloodthirsty Destro is.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to murder the hostages. He's going to disintegrate New York City because they're not taking his threat seriously. I mean, granted, they can't go that far because it's a cartoon, but Cobra's really nasty in the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like Ian mentioned, they have the slave pens. They're having people fight to the death for sport. Yeah,
they're ruthless.
They sure are.
And to go back, I mean, my comment on the animation earlier, the one thing where it does actually really succeed, though, is the action. I'm impressed with the limited animation that they actually have. That's easily where the best animation is in the fight scenes. It's not while they're just walking around corridors, but when they're fighting, Cobra versus G.I. Joe, it's kinetic. The colors are vibrant, especially with the pretty lasers. But
blue and red.
Exactly. It gets the point across the way that it's supposed to, and you actually really feel the action going on.
I think as a contrast, Shane, what's the G.I. Joe cartoon where people die in it? Is it Retaliation? Resolute, which I want to say Warren Ellis wrote.
You are correct. Yeah, that aired on Adult Swim originally.
If you want to see another version of the cartoon that's still very faithful to like the characters and the
design,
but they're knocking people off in that.
Oh yeah,
left and right.
Very disappointed.
Well done.
I was very disappointed that was only 11 episodes. I felt like they could have did so much more with that.
I thought it was just the movie and that was it.
11 episodes. Yep.
Maybe was that the movie then? Was it?
I'm thinking of G.I. Joe Resolute the movie. Are you thinking of the series they did a few years ago, Ian?
Let me
G.I. Joe Resolute as a series, at least from what I remember about it. And it says here, written by Warren Ellis, directed by Joaquin Dos Santos, aired on Cartoon Network in 2009. I believe there was a movie as well.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah,
but
I didn't realize there was a series too. Okay,
exactly. So they were 10-minute long episodes. So it didn't. Maybe they typed.
That's probably the movie broken out down into episodes. Then
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So. That's probably what that is.
Yep.
Here it is.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Shane always once again.
And that's let's see, how long is that? It's 58 minutes.
Yeah, I was saying to Chris while you were looking for it, Shane, that I think they cut them out as 10-minute episodes, which is why they're listed as 11 episodes, but it is just the one long thing.
Okay, good. I was hoping it wasn't more episodes that I was missing.
Yeah.
Question: do you think,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Do you think one of the things that has kept the 80s cartoon and our part of culture would be the knowing is half the battle at the end? Because I know He-Man did similar type of, they didn't say that obviously, but they gave you like PSAs at the end. I remember more of the G.I. Joe ones, even though I was way into He-Man, than I do about the He-Man episodes of the She-Ra. But so I kind of wondered, do you think just the knowing is half the battle, that catchphrase helps keep the legacy of that cartoon series.
Certainly among our generation. It's such
I think
a great mnemonic device.
Because our generation, as it grew up, NBC also adopted that for The More You Know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was very much akin to Knowing Is Half the Battle.
And the amazing parodies that were done.
Oh yeah,
with the PSAs, pork chop sandwiches. Like, if you've never seen them, just search them on YouTube. They're very explicit, so go into it knowing that. But they're redubs and they're hilarious.
I have to chuckle because so with our son's OCD, whenever we leave and we have to reverse the leave. You can't just reverse because he throws a fit. So you have to say ready, set, go. On your marks, get set, go. Then to mix it up. I incorporated and away we go from Power Glide, Transformers, and I got in there Spider Friends, and he knows to go for it. So the other thing that I worked in there is it happened earlier where I didn't know something, and Meg taught me that, and I looked at our daughter. And I said, Sophie, knowing is, and she said, half the battle.
There you go. Yep.
I wanted to take a moment again, because I really want to emphasize how important Larry Hama is to this entire world that we're talking about. What do we think of his writing in this first issue?
That's great.
Oh, it's fantastic. It like you said, it's not talking down to anybody. It's full on an adult story.
Well, what I think is a pure point that Larry Hama knows what he's doing is that sometimes you read a first issue and it does feel like a listicle. It feels like you're hitting all the beats. You got to introduce the characters, and then by issue 5 or 6, that's when things really get rolling. This is G.I. Joe from the beginning. Like, yes, you do have the introduction of the characters and all that, but there's story here, there's personality here, and his talent just shines through. And the fact that he's still doing it today.
Yeah, because they're continuing the numbering. Is it IDW?
Yeah.
Well, it was. They just lost the license with issue 300, and now it's going to somebody else, and Larry Hama is moving to write it for that company, whoever it is. Okay. I don't think it's been announced yet.
I don't think it has either.
Does anyone know? Because every once in a while, when I'm curious about what's going on with a character, I'll hop on the internet or Wikipedia or whatnot. And the last I saw, and Cobra, like I said, Cobra Commander is one of those interesting characters because there was some of his backstory, but there's still some things that you just can't. And I know at one point they established that they almost made it basically Secret Empire, that Cobra Commander, when he dies, somebody else just takes up the mantle and continues on. And I thought, well, that's dumb. I like the idea of just this guy. I like his long hippie hair that he had on the helmet, that when that was revealed, you're like, what the heck is this? This is not what I expect.
Well, Hama did a great story. I'm sure at least Shane read this one. Maybe Matt did too. In a series called G.I. Joe Classified or Snake Eyes Classified, where he revealed that Cobra Commander and Snake Eyes knew each other, right, when they were younger.
That I don't think I've read.
I think from what I recall, it was Cobra Commander is responsible for the death of. But I think this was in the.
No, that was Cobra Commander's brother was a drunk driver, killed Snake Eyes' family.
Oh, wow.
Was it? Okay.
That was in the Marvel comic, and then Hama did another series. I want to say it was through Image. I don't quote me on that. Maybe his Devils do, where he did like an origin story of Snake Eyes, and he revealed that he and Cobra Commander knew each other like when they were younger, and it was very well done. I think it's called Snake Eyes Classified. Ian's checking.
They do have a Snake Eyes Classified. I can never find the first issue. I think the second, and then I can never. They were so hard to find. I think isn't that also revealed that the explosion that took out his vocal cords was in the helicopter, or was that in the Marvel run as well?
That was in the Marvel one.
That was in the Marvel run.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the classic 2-part Snake Eyes, the origin. I remember as a kid, I'm like, they're going to tell us who Snake Eyes is. I couldn't wait to read it because they really built up the mystery around this character. There they are. Shane once again.
And I think these are second prints that again.
What is that? 26 and 27.
26 and 27.
Yeah.
Yep.
One thing I want to point about Hama's writing. So I'm looking at the first issue. So, and this again, these are just these touches that make it so much more than just a marketing story. So Clutch is driving Hawk to the base, and I love how they have it beneath like the chaplain's assistant.
Oh yeah,
motor pool and Fort
and there's a
Wadsworth.
great cross section of the pit showing every level.
Two things. One, Hama and the artist put so much time into the schematics, the pit, the different weapons, the vehicles. That's all in the first issue. But Clutch is driving fast, and Hawk goes, "Slow down, Clutch. This is in Asbury Park. We're not on Thunder Road." So he does the Springsteen reference. He drops in there. And as a kid, I'm like, "What's Thunder Road?" And I'm like, "Oh, of course." I love. Again, he's doing a comic that at 9 years old, I loved it because it's the fighting and the uniforms and all that. And Cobra looks really cool. And now as an adult, I'm like, look at all this other stuff he's putting in this.
Yeah.
That's damn good writing.
And Storm Shadow doesn't get introduced until later on, right?
21.
Yeah, that's his first appearance.
Got it. Okay.
21 is often credited as, I've read many times by people who know that if you want to learn how to draw a comic, or how to like pace out a sequential story, you look at G.I. Joe issue 21 because Hama did the breakdowns in that issue.
Yeah.
Because he's an artist too. And I want to say Steve Leolola did the finishes.
Let's see.
Shane can tell me. But have you looked at issue 21, Ian?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Oh. Just as a lover of the medium of comic books, it's a very important comic.
Steve Leola.
Yeah, and you should definitely check it out because it's a great story. And again, there's no dialogue or captions, but the way that Hama and Leolola pace it out, it's a real masterclass.
Well, for
now, when did that come out?
What year did that come out? I'll take a look right now.
84, 80. It's December of 83.
Okay. And for now, if you have Comixology Unlimited, obviously this might change since IDW is not going to have the license for much longer. But for now, the G.I. Joe classics are available on Comixology Unlimited. So if you do want to check those out, you might only have a limited time now, but that's how I'm probably going to wind up reading at least a little bit more of this.
And Ian, I would say not that you can do it all, especially if it's a limited time, if they decide that it's just over in there. But I would say the first 50 issues are the best of everything.
When I think about comics in the 80s, and there's so much great stuff coming in the 80s from both major companies, and of course there was a surge of independence as well.
Yeah.
We all know. But I still go back to these G.I. Joe comics, and I still am thoroughly engrossed by them because, again, Hama there's the kid level stuff, but then he's talking about like geopolitical stuff and Cold War stuff and all these things that now you're like, wow, look at all the stuff he's really bringing into this world. And it's really fascinating. And I want to pivot for a minute because it just struck me. I hate the G.I. Joe movies. I think they're awful.
They are.
And I just... Have we all seen those?
Yes.
I saw the animated or all three?
No, the live action ones.
All three live action ones.
I mean, there are aspects of both that I liked, primarily with the Snake Guy stuff. But for the most part, if they didn't exist, I would not be upset.
Yeah. And I think as we read this comic, and then I think the comic does what it does really well. I think the animated series, for what it's trying to do, does it pretty well. And I love your guys' take. I think the movies are such a massive misfire.
Yeah.
They didn't.
But really I feel the same way about the Transformers movies for the most part. I think that a big mistake, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Michael Bay ones. Don't even get me started on that crap. But I think that one of the mistakes, and you could go back to superhero comics of the early 2000s as well as another example of this, is that they forget why these were so successful as animated series and comics. They think that they have to go like
there's no humor.
Yeah,
there's no humor at all.
Exactly. They have to go too serious, and also you don't have to work in like the CGI and all that nearly as much. Like if it was all practical, if you had a Die Hard style G.I. Joe movie with practical effects and it was just like war, then that would work perfectly.
Well, and in both the G.I. Joe and the Transformers movies, there is comedy. It's just forced and bad.
Yeah. The comic has, because Hama has a great sense of humor, so that there are some tongue-in-cheek elements in what's going on there, but also there's really serious themes being addressed as well. But he just manages them so well overall. And the movies, I just felt like they got some of like the trappings of it, but and even that wasn't that great in many ways. Like Cobra looked terrible in general. The Baroness looked great, but most of it looked awful. But it just there was something so just artificial about it. It was so off. My God.
Well, I'll tell you. Here's the biggest indicator that how off at least the first movie was. Larry Hama had to fight to not have Snake Eyes say one word, but they wanted him to say. They wanted him to say one word. I think it's when Storm Shadow gets killed. By the way, the actor who played Storm Shadow, I thought did an excellent job.
Oh, he did.
It's one of those things when I watch movies, I was like, I just want to see you and Snake Eyes in a movie.
Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow look good in the movie. Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
but he had to fight to put the point out there that Snake Eyes does not say anything. He can't say anything. But that was one of the arguments. And when I heard that, I was like, that kind of makes sense why they went with other things. I mean, I like Zartan. I thought kind of what they did with him.
He was pretty good.
But I think he looked just very old, the actor. And I like the actor, Arnold, was it Masul? He just looked very old when you saw him in the sequel. But it was a big misfire.
Well, and Ian, I don't mind I know this is a sidebar. I don't mind the first Transformers movie because that was a contained story. It was good, done well enough, and it was exciting to see them on the big screen. The rest are kind of a tray.
Did Spielberg direct the first one?
No, I don't think he directed it. It was Michael Bay.
Michael Bay.
Okay.
Spielberg executive produced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the CGS Easter egg, Shane.
Yep, sure is. There's a couple in that first one.
And I agree. The Transformers films, at least for a while, were almost like the Star Trek films, where like every other one was decent. But it's still, to me, for the most part, missed the heart of the Transformers. And we didn't get that until Bumblebee, and Bumblebee, I think, got it perfect.
That was probably the best of the bunch. That first 15 minutes was what I'd like to see.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think you can kind of get an idea. I mean, we're kind of getting off a tangent, but I think you can kind of get the idea when they're trying to do these now, and I haven't seen Bumblebee, but the stuff that I did see is Optimus Prime looks like Optimus Prime when you were watching the cartoon in the 80s. I understand what they were going for in the Michael Bay movies with making it seem more practical. But at the same time, you're like, I understand that you got the voice, but he doesn't seem like Optimus Prime. But then by Bumblebee, and I think even with the whatever the Beast ones that's coming out, they're starting to go more into that traditional. I think the only thing is Bumblebee needs to be the Volkswagen, which I guess Volkswagen won't do. But that's one of those things that stands out is I've noticed that a lot. So I mentioned about the early stuff from the aughts with regard to I think comic book movies or comic. I think when they're trying to take these properties and either reboot them, bring them back because there's such a fan base for that they miss things that connected with people initially. Cobra Kai, I don't know if you guys are watching the Cobra Kai.
I love
series.
Cobra Kai. Love it.
I think that's one of the things that's a good example of they took what worked originally. So when they brought it back,
well put.
You were into it. Now there's aspects of it as we go on that I'm not as interested in as much as I was initially. But still, they capitalized. It didn't seem like they tried to do a massive overhaul with just using some of the characters in there. It seemed like there was a growth. And so I think Hollywood, to some extent, is starting to pick that up when they're trying to pick up these properties again, is we're not rebuilding the wheel. We're taking things that people hold dear, because that's how you're going to get nostalgia. You obviously want the new people to come in, but if you don't have the older people coming to bring the new people in, you probably aren't going to be that successful.
Absolutely.
Matt, really well put. And I would add to that I think with G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe as we know it, the real American hero, that has a finite lifespan because really it's people around our age who are into that. And I think what I would like to see, I think it should be a live action serialized series like the comic where they can really develop the characters and the world of Cobra. I think it could be really fun and really well done. I don't know if they're ever going to do that, but I think that could be really well done. I think the problem with the movies is they were just trying to jam so much into these couple films, and like they can only focus on so many characters
and sell toys.
And sell toys. And Cobra looked awful in general, and like in no way would I find like Destro was terrible. In no way did I find any of them intimidating or anything like that. I think a show ideally Hama should be involved. If they could thread that line between like some of the kind of tongue-in-cheek elements, but then like the really interesting geopolitical stuff, like make Cobra actually menacing, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's a lot they could do with that. I mean, who knows? But the comic worked. To go back to Matt's point, the comic really worked well for a reason. And like same thing with Karate Kid. Like they took the great parallel. They took those ingredients, and like you said, Matt, a lot of my students they didn't grow up with the Karate Kid. They love watching the show though.
Yeah.
So that's a good formula.
My final comment on this tangent: you cannot be afraid of your property.
Yes.
And that was a problem with many movies at that time. I do agree. It would make a terrific TV, like streaming series or what have you. Like do something like what you did with like Jack Ryan or Jack Reacher, like any of those properties around right now. And you would definitely be able to make something work. And I guarantee you Cobra Commander would look a lot more like Cobra Commander at this point, because now that we've gotten Marvel characters that look like actual Marvel characters.
Yes. And
DC characters that look like DC characters.
Yeah.
We're not afraid of the property anymore. And that's
well put, sir.
That's that. Yeah. Yep. And just pushing it back to this is that, it's an excellent introduction in both ways. I think that issue 1 to me has me interested in more, and the miniseries has me wanting to be nostalgic and go watch some more G.I. Joe. So mission accomplished.
Yeah.
And as Shane pointed out in the book, as Hama and the artists working with him build that world, it gets more and more engrossing, and Cobra gets more and more interesting because they turn on each other. There's intrigue. There's different factions. Cobra Commander has this abandoned son who shows up.
There's betrayals.
The Baroness and Destro have their thing going on, and it's really interesting. And he really has a lot of fun with all that. So
they still add all the new releases of toys and vehicles and everything into it. But it makes sense yet. At least up through closer to 100 before it gets really silly. But
it makes sense because you're right. They obviously had an obligation to always introduce whatever came out, but he tries to always ground it in military realities, like the way they're using the equipment. He's always referencing, like in the comic book, like the Cobra Troopers have actual guns that you can identify as real guns. Like they're using like AK-47s, where in the cartoon they have like those dopey laser rifles, whatever they are. So there's that element of reality that he and the artist always make sure is there in the comic, which makes it that much more satisfying to read.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's and you're right. There were sometimes I didn't feel as though I didn't feel as though the main purpose of the comic was to sell toys. Even if it was, I never read it as they're introducing this character because that toy's going to count, or they're introducing this vehicle. And then I think of that conversely with Batman and Robin, which had a lot of problems. Is it seemed like we're going to have a toy of this, we're going to have a toy of that. So they need these new vehicles for no apparent reason whatsoever. But when they go up in the big battle, they got to quick go back to the Batcave. They got to get these new weapons, these new vehicles, new suits. And so it's like we got to get these toys out. There was only a couple times leading up to 100 that I was like, kind of seems like they told him, hey, you got to crowbar this toy in there. But for the most part, everything seemed to have a purpose. Yeah. And they just happen to have a toy that's coming out that reflect what.
It's funny you mentioned those toys, and you say the word Batman and Robin. I know you were referring to the movie, but I also think of the animated series, Batman the Animated Series, which also had Batman and Robin. And what I found hilarious is that not once did any of those toys show up in the animated.
No.
And yet
no different costumes, no different. Yeah.
But they found a way to make toys out of literally every single thing you could possibly do. It's like, no, Batman has never had a yellow suit. I don't know.
Well, in the 50s, he had a zebra suit.
Well, in the 50s, yeah.
What I liked is
certainly not in the 90s.
I remember when the 89 movie came out, they had 3 figures, Batman, Bob, and Joker. Yep. And I think they might have had 2 vehicles. And then by Batman Returns, they just like opened up the floodgates. Yep. You're just like, I don't remember this suit. I don't remember that suit. I don't remember Robin. And you're just like going down the list like, this is clearly now they're really getting out of hand.
Yep.
Well, they grabbed that back credit card and they just went crazy.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for suggesting this one, Chris. I think this was a really rollicking good time.
My pleasure, brother.
Just before I forget, Ian, also don't discount the yearbooks.
Oh, the yearbooks
that's
are great.
Their annuals.
Oh.
Okay.
Now, the first yearbook really just has the first issue and a synopsis of some of the cartoons, file cards. That's not as enthralling as some of the other ones to come.
Okay.
Yeah, the yearbooks are awesome.
Yeah.
Do they still do yearbooks?
No. They did it for so many
3
years.
or 4 years.
For the original series.
Okay.
But the later issues actually advance the overall narrative.
Story. Yeah. My problem with it's not that I'm thrilled that Larry Hama has written all of it. My problem always was more the artwork was not up to.
They had a wide variety of artists on the series.
Yeah. So as time went on, not in the Marvel one, that one was fairly solid. But once you got into IDW, especially, some of the artwork to me suffered. So I have not read near as much of that continuation as other people I know.
Devil's Due. Remember when they got the license back, and they
restarted.
The Devil Due story was supposed to take place years after the Marvel series.
Yeah.
And I remember they did it. They did an epic final story called World War III, which I remember liking quite a bit. Actually,
yep,
I don't even know if that's in print anymore as a trade.
I have the trade. I don't think it's in print anymore as a trade.
They've reprinted some of the Devil's Due stuff under IDW, but I'm not sure if it all ever actually came back. Yeah. Yep. All right. Great job, gentlemen.
Matt, thanks for joining us. Your participation.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Absolutely. And Shane, thank you for showing me all of your figures.
Oh, sure.
I love Shane's Toy Corner.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it started out as Snake Eyes, Scarlett, and I guess a Cobra figure or something, but that was it. And then it just I keep thinking I'm totally out of room, and then I start rearranging a little bit. I'm like, I fit 3 more.
There's always room, Shane. There's
okay. But Serpentor is certainly not going to fit at all, no matter what.
So you're not getting it?
No, I have it. It's right here.
No, it won't fit.
It just won't fit. No,
one more last observation, because Shane reminded me of this.
Sure.
It contrasted the book with the cartoon. I couldn't stand Serpentor in the cartoon. I loved him in the comic.
Oh, yeah.
Because in the comic, they really explored that he was the amalgam of the genes of Alexander the Great, Napoleon, and Julius Caesar. And, when he's thinking of past battles of Hannibal, when he's leading the Cobra forces into battle, and he's threatening Cobra Commander's control of the organization. And he's not this bloviating, overblown, hyperbolic melodrama figure like he is in the show. I couldn't stand him in the cartoon.
And in the cartoon, he's just always yelling at everybody.
He's always yelling. Always yelling. And the comic, he's more subtle.
Every sentence ends with "This I command."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awful. This I command, Cobra. La, 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 la.
All right.
But yet, I will watch that movie a few times a year just because of what it is. It's terrible storyline, but I will watch it. And I took the boys. They just re-released it this year for its anniversary of some kind. I forget maybe 25th, and they showed it at the Lidditz Theater.
Really? Okay.
And I took the boys down and we watched it, and they enjoyed it for what it was worth, but they're like, that was kind of silly. I'm like, yes, it was.
But I remember getting nightmares from that when I saw it. Specifically when
I believe it.
I forget who it is and I forget the vehicle, but he's driving along. And I think it's when you first see Nemesis Enforcer, and he comes up and he pries open the bottom of the for some reason, that gave me nightmares for the longest time of just being someplace and all of a sudden him ripping wherever I was.
Sure.
Every now and then, when I'm around the right friends, I will just randomly go, Cobra, Cobra!
Yeah. I love how Matt's story always reminds the audience how CGS brings out our childhood traumas. Her is just a cornucopia of those.
So, one more note is that, just mentioning that the G.I. Joe movie never came out in theaters originally, there was going to be a Gem movie as well, which got canned because of how bad the Transformers movie did. And that was in development, and it would have changed the Gem show as it was, just like how,
Transformers changed.
Transformers changed everything. G.I. Joe changed a decent amount of stuff.
Yeah.
There would have been changes in who was a misfit and who was a hologram. There would have been betrayals and manipulations, yada, yada, yada. But they stopped it mid-production, and that was that. So
I still remember seeing the Transformers movie in the theater.
I did too.
And that came out, 86? So I would have been
85,
7.
86.
I remember my younger sister, who's 3 years younger than I am, had to go to the bathroom. And I remember my mom trusting that I was not going to go anywhere, that she could take my sister, because I did not want to leave, even though this was after Optimus getting killed. And I'm like, I can't believe this. But I remember that vividly, of them walking in front of me while I'm trying to watch and trying to understand what the hell's going on here. And Megatron's gone, but he's not. But that's a whole nother tangent.
The one thing that traumatized me that I remember from Transformers was Zombie Optimus in that episode right before they brought him back. Where
they had to.
Yeah, the whole black Optimus, no, I'm alive, but I'm not.
Yep.
Very, very creepy for a young me. All right, guys. So a couple of things of note before we wrap things up here. This is, our last one before Christmas, but when Christmas comes out, you will have a treat. Mr. Murdo may not be on this episode, but you will get your usual Murdo Christmas goodness, so please stay tuned for that. We don't know what he's doing yet, but it will be a lovely reading, as it is. Long-standing tradition here.
In the sonorous tones.
Indeed. And you will be receiving a comic timing, because unless things change, I will be recording with that group of friends tomorrow, and I'll be
Excellent.
recording that feed next week at some point.
And I should note that it's not definite, but I am hoping to get to the studio the week between Christmas and New Year's for another special recording.
I'll be bringing a laptop with me just in case. So
yes, sir.
I will be away in Florida, but I will hopefully be able to zoom in for that one if it does indeed happen. If not, I'm sure you fine folks will be able to soldier on.
Indeed.
Excellent. Alrighty. Once again, a reminder, patreon.com/comicgeekspeak. We thank you so much for your continued support of the show in any way that you can possibly give it. We really do greatly appreciate that. And comicgeekspeak.com/donate.php if you want to give an old school donation. That is also still a thing that exists. And my personal Patreon is patreon.com/comictiming if you want to throw anything my way for producing. But once again, Matt, thank you for joining us, my friend. Happy holiday.
No problem. Had a good time.
Christmas and New Year's and all that shebang, and we'll definitely talk to you in the new year.
Indeed.
All right.
Happy Festivus.
Yes. Happy Festivus for the rest of us. Let's see. Where's the end credits? There we go. And the role of Shane will be played by Shane. So, Shane, over to you.
Shane be Shane. Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com. To send us an email, the address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. Look us up on YouTube at youtube.com/comicgeekspeak. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, send in your muddle the merds. Thanks to everyone who contributes to the episodes. We appreciate it. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time. Yo, Joe.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists.
Cobra, la 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 la.
Comic Geek Speak, comic Geek Speak, comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is
Is your mom there?
No, I'm home alone.
Well, you won a prize. What's your address?
42 Oak Street. Hey, Roblox, some stranger's bringing me a prize.
A stranger, huh? All he wanted to bring you was trouble. Remember, never tell anyone you're home alone and never give anyone your address.
I'll say Mom can't come to the phone.
Smart thinking.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Superb.
There was no other way to end it.